Hi crafty friends, working in my small square art journal, I'm very excited to be using these brand new products from Funky Fossil. I have the Doodle Daisies stencil and the alphabet stencil, and then this is part of the Blooming Marvelous bundle, which is designed by ShanoukiArt. It is filled with sheets of Quirky art that you can cut out for focal points, and then there are these beautiful stamps, and then a bag of ready-to-use die cuts. They are bright and quirky fun designs, and I know I'll be using them a lot. I will put the link to Funky Fossil in the description box below. As always, I'm going to start my art journal page with some collage in the background. I've gone for black and white with a few elements of really bold design. I'm thinking this will create a good contrast to the bright colors I'll be using with my focal points. I'm just placing a piece of scrap paper underneath the page I'm working on to prevent all the Mod Podge getting onto my other pages and my desk. I'm going to apply the Mod Podge onto the paper, and then I'm also going to apply a layer over the top of my collage piece. This is to create a base for me to add color later. The Mod Podge waterproofs this paper, so if I add any kinds of inks or watercolors or acrylic paints, this paper won't become fragile and tear or get soggy. Not much thought is going into these papers at the moment, I'm just placing them down. Unlike my scrappy art journal, this one I want to keep a little bit neater, in the sense that I don't want pieces sort of hanging off the page. Well, for now, I might change my mind later on while I work on this journal, so I'm just going to trim off this excess. And now with my first layer ready, I'm now going to add my white gesso. For this time, I'm going to place gesso over the entire background because I wanted to dull down to allow my focal points to stand out more. I do obviously want some of that background to be shining through, so I'm not making a solid layer of the gesso. It is still quite transparent. After the first layer of gesso is dry, I'm going back in again and adding a little bit more in certain areas in a thicker, more concentrated way. So we do have some sections of like a solid white. I like doing this because it prevents that background layer from being totally flat. I've decided I'm going to use this cute little girl from the die cut pack as part of my focal point. I just think she is super fun. So I'm just going to see sort of where I'm going to put her. I'm trying to decide what I'm actually even going to do with this page. And then I decided that I want her little skirt to be a little bit brighter pink. It was in a pale pink color, so I've just used a marker to make that a bit darker. I wanted it more bright, so I'm trying to use a Posca pen now in a bright pink to paint that section. There is no rule that says you cannot change up these die cuts. And to extend that pink color, I'm going to do a little bit of splatter. And yes, when I press the nib of the Posca pen down on paper, some of the paint does come out, and you can use it in this way. Drying that a little bit so that it doesn't smudge. I then decided I wanted quite a contrasting background to go with this pink that I'm going to be using. So I'm going in with some blues and browns. I'm using my inks, my distress inks from Tim Holtz in some blues and the vintage photo color, which is a brown. Using my blending brush, I'm just going over the edges sort of and then into the middle. Not really over everything. I want just certain sections to have the blue. I'm doing some areas darker, some lighter. Just have fun with this. Add as few or as many colors as you want. I really love this technique and I find it super fun. And because I have the collage paper in the background, when this ink goes over them, there where the edges of the paper are, it'll go slightly darker, which adds additional interest and additional texture to the page. And now, because these distress inks do react to water, I am going to sprinkle some water with my paintbrush over the entire page. I'm going to leave that for a few seconds and then use a paper towel to dab up the water. And there where my water droplets were, the color is picked up and it leaves this beautiful, unique effect. Going in now for another layer, I'm going to use this stencil and I'm going to use it with some texture paste. A small amount of texture paste on my palette knife. I'm going to press it through the stencil onto the page. Again, not everywhere, just in certain areas. For me, I find that if I had to do sort of everything over the entire page, for example, the gesso in one tone, the inks in another layer solidly, and then just the whole page with this texture paste, I feel it becomes monotonous. This creates interest. There's lights and darks, there's different tones, and your eye sort of flows across the page. How cute is the stencil? While the texture paste is drying, I'm going to work on my focal points. I'm using a new piece of mixed media paper and I have the Doodle Daisies stencil from Funky Fossil that I'm going to use, and I'm going to go in with my color burst powders. I'm using a bright pink, an orange and a yellow. I'm sprinkling the powders over the stencil and then I'm going to spray with water. These powders I'm using are by Ken Oliver. They're also a brand called Brusho. They really are just concentrated watercolor powders. They are probably my favorite way of adding color to my projects. After I've sprayed the water, I'm going to put a piece of paper over the top and press it down, and then you can also use that for later projects. I have added a little bit too much water, so it hasn't left a lot of definition around the flowers, but that's okay, we can work with that. And because my idea with my YouTube channel is to show you everything I do, even the things that don't work out, I was going to show you this. I'm going through with a black fine liner pen over the one flower with the stencil, thinking I could get some kind of definition. But on the bottom left, that didn't really work like I imagined it would. So I'm just going in now on the other two flowers without the stencil and just making lines around the petals, very doodle-like, keeping it fun and quirky. I'm now going to fussy cut out the two flowers. I love how the colors have combined and sort of created an ombre effect, and I love how they look very watercolor-like. With my flowers ready to go, I'm now going to see where I'm going to place these with my little girl on my page. And I don't know about you, but I think those oranges and pinks go absolutely fantastic with that blue-brown background. Whoops, the texture paste is still a bit wet. I'm going to dry it some more. I was thinking to use the smaller flower behind the girl as sort of her wings. I love adding the wings on little characters on my work. It just wasn't really working out, so I decided to go with just actual flowers, one on the top right and one sort of near the bottom left. I'm trying to coordinate the bottom of her dress with the pink flowers, so I've got some of the watercolor powder that I used on my flowers. I'm just adding it to my paint tray and adding some water. And then I've sort of done it at the bottom of her dress, and now I'm going to add a little bit of splatter on the page as if it's sort of fallen off from the flowers. Of course, here I'm using the same colors that I used for my flowers. And now because I have the texture paste designs, the splatters aren't actual little splatters, they're sort of becoming obscure little shapes. So I've tried to dab up the ones I don't like and then just adding the splatter sort of on the flatter areas. I just want it to look like the color has splashed off those flowers. I'm happy with how everything looks and the placement. I'm going to stick everything down. Again, here I'm using Mod Podge, more of a wet, thick glue, so it can attach well to all that texture paste and background bits that I have done. And remember, you don't always have to use an entire focal point. You can cut it in half. As you can see here, I'm attaching the flowers with some of it hanging off, which I am going to trim later. If I had used the whole flower on the page, it would have been, I feel, too crowded. I think this gives it a softer flow and it's balanced better. And also my little girl is not lost amongst the flowers. If this page was in my scrappy art journal, I would have left these flowers hanging off the page. But for this one, we're going to trim it off, and I think that looks so much better. I'm trying to see if I can use the other edges of the flowers somewhere else, but I'm feeling it is still going to be then too crowded, and we're going to lose the little girl. I'm going to add a little sentiment. This is from the same bag where I got the little girl die cut. And I had a toss-up between using a black with white or white with black. I felt that the black would be a bit too bold, so I went with the white one instead. These die cuts are really good because they are made on a thicker cardstock, so they're quite firm and easy to work with. Using a black fine liner pen, but not this thick one, a thinner one, I'm going to go all the way around the page, very roughly looking doodle-like again, as that is the theme of the page. I think this creates great definition. For some reason at this point I felt that we needed more splatter, so I'm just going to cover up the areas that I don't want to have any color on them. It's mainly on the little girl's dress, and it's like the flowers that I try to do. I want to see if the color is splashing off her dress. And I felt she still needed some wings. I wanted her to be a little bit more magical. So I'm going to create some wings. I'm just going to use a piece of white paper and my black pen, and just going to make very rough wing shapes, and I'm going to cut those out and then just stick them behind her. I'm not going to add any color. I'm going to leave them white because I don't want them to be sort of too bright. I want them sort of to be just in the background, that they're there but not there, if that makes sense. As you can see, I did try a few different shapes and sizes until I found ones that would suit her. I've cut them out and I'm sticking them down just behind her. Going around the sentiment with my black pen again to create that definition and finishing touch, something I think I tend to do with all the sentiments I use. I really hope you enjoyed this video and were inspired to create your own. The stencils and die cuts I used today are available at Funky Fossil, linked in the description box below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the little bell so you're notified every time I upload new content. Thanks again for watching, happy creating, and I'll see you again soon. Bye!